the last time I was in Youngstown, I came home and I went to this McDonald's to get a bite to eat on a Sunday night, nothing open. Slight drizzle in the fall. And as I'm going in, I hear somebody call my name. I said, Carl. I went over and I sat down. I said, how you doing? He says, I'm going to prison. I'm going to prison next week. I got framed, some prick I know 20 years. You know. I said, well, what's the charge? Transportation, burglary tools across state lines. You know. So anyway, he says, but I just want to tell you, Eddie, that we're happy for your success. And we're following you a little bit. We're all proud of you. Happy for your success. I said, well, that's nice, Carl. Thank you. I said, how's Philly doing? He said, yeah, Philly, you ain't seen Philly. I said, no, how's he doing? He said, oh, Philly. Philly's doing real good. His entire fucking family died. I'll tell him you said hello, though. He's thrilled for you, by the way. And I'll tell him that you said hello. I said, Jesus, his whole family died. Yeah, his father dropped dead. His brother got killed some horrible disease. His sister got hit by a car. They're all dead. But I'll tell him you said hello. I said, well, how about your buddy, Bobby? You ain't seen Z? No. Oh, Z's doing real good. You know, his wife, Angie, left him last week. They're married 20 years, you know, Angie. He come home from work. How you doing? He says, guess what, Z? I don't love you anymore. Z's heart, boom, he blowed a valve, Z. Quadruple bypass for Z. He's thrilled for you, by the way. Happy for your success. And this went on, you know. And finally I said, you know, he said, we just want to know where to put the bullet in, that's all, you know. He said, anybody knows shit, would you write me when I'm in prison?
People have said to me through the years that, you know, that side of the story of Youngstown got to be told. That's a unique town. It hasn't been told right, and it should be told.
What is it about? It's about Youngstown? About having lived in Youngstown?
Down south.
Grown up in Youngstown? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Most people don't never heard of it, you know. Where is it? That sort of thing. You know.
In 1796, an interested settler named John Young purchased a patch of land in northeast Ohio. Youngstown was located on the Mahoning River just west of Pennsylvania. Steel turned Youngstown into a boom town. The mills gave workers the American dream, a place to grow up, raise a family, make a good life. Today, the smoldering smokestacks serve as a bitter reminder of what Youngstown used to be, the third largest steel-producing city in the US of A. But if steel made Youngstown into what it was, then it also helped lead to what it's become.
Growing up in Youngstown, you know, in the 60s and 70s, like a normal Rockwell painting, you know what I mean? You know, you had kids running outside, you know, the dogs playing in the streets, you know, it's a Pollyanna life.
There's so many memories at East High School. I remember the 1937 undefeated team they had.
It was a fun town, it was a happy town, there were so many things going on, all the movie theaters, art museums, and there was always something going on here.
Grew up on 221 North Heights on the corner of North Heights and Ohio, half a block from Wick Park. I just loved it. I loved growing up there.
Life was great when we were growing up. It was a fun time. We played down the street at Shady Run. We were always outside.
We ran through the neighborhoods, you know, up and down, over the trees, over the fences, through the stealing grapes, you know. We never walked on the sidewalk. You know what I mean? It was like through backyards. All that's changed. If you go back there now, the house is gone. It's completely gone.
There's nothing left anymore. I look at the empty lots and I know I can name who was there. The Jimmy family, the Viccarells.
Southside, when I was a kid, you know, you were real close to the mills. All you heard was the whistles and the trains all through the night, the pipes clanging. And it was like you just could hear the hustle and bustle of the steel mills the whole time when I was growing up.
You had a lot of Hispanics, had a lot of Italians, had a lot of African Americans and whites.
The Welsh were here early, some Scotch, a number of Irish and Germans. And then later Middle Europe came, and the Mediterranean came in. And then we benefited from the movement of Ashkenazi from Europe, and we had the terrific Jewish community. We got a great Greek community, Italian community, Slovaks. You name the ethnic group, we've got them.
I have great memories. Youngstown is a wonderful, wonderful place to call home, like the billboard says. Family, extended family, Sunday dinners, picnics in people's backyards. It was a great place.
How old were you when you...
I was 11 when I was selling papers.
They make a penny a paper.
In town. And then they were 3 cents at the time. We'd make a penny on it. I ended up going home at 12, 15 cents. Hey, in them days, you bought a couple pounds of hamburger for a quarter, man.
I think in breaking down, the north side was the wealthy people, east side was always strong blue collar, south side was sort of in between, and west side was a strong, you know, hard-working ethnic area. That was Youngstown. That was Youngstown.
I lived in a 3-room house in the cellar.
Not 3 rooms, not 3 bedrooms.
There
three
was
rooms.
5 of us, plus my mother, we survived.
I'm from the east side. It was rough. I mean, you know, standing in the projects, you know, what they call the hood, it was rough. But, you know, I had good parents that, you know, raised me the right way and how to, you know, conduct myself.
There was always room. We made room.
Sometimes I do find myself checking folks when it comes to where we're from. For example, when I go and travel, someone said, where are you from? Say from Youngstown. And somebody may be traveling who lives in the suburbs, so I'm from Boardman. I'm like, that's nothing but the south side of Youngstown. You know, get real. You know?
It's where I was born. Youngstown means a lot to me. This is where I still represent Youngstown. You know, I go in the fight with my trunks. I have the block Y for Y shoe. There's always Youngstown, Ohio on my shirt.
You miss this place. I don't know. Maybe it's the smell. I don't know, but you really do. You miss it. I mean, me and Kelly go away, and you know, we've been to some very nice places. You know, but it's 3, 4, 5 weeks, so we're ready to go. You know, we want to go home, and it's I don't know. You know, it's like home, the whole town.
Youngstown's me. That's where I was raised. That's where I still live, and it's always going to be a part of me. I've been here for 26 years, and that's a long time. So I just, you know, I'm a Youngstown boy, Youngstown man, whatever you want to call me.
By the 1970s, Youngstown had been making steel for over a century. The huge furnaces provided more than just paychecks for the steel workers whose sweat and blood built the Mahoning Valley. Steel was the backbone of the local economy. City budgets were bulging. The population had grown to roughly 160,000 people. The valley had the highest rate of home ownership in the nation, but much more than prosperity. Steel meant hope and promised a future.
Years ago when I was a kid, you know, there were all these little houses on the west side, the south side, the north side. People worked in the steel mills. They put their kids through college, you know, from those mills and that sort of thing. Plenty of food. They'd have a car, you know, they'd buy a nice car. And that was enough for everybody, you know, that was good. That was, a lot of these people were immigrants, you know. They didn't aspire to much more than that. And this was like the American dream in a sense.
Years later, Bruce Springsteen wrote a song, not the one, obviously, the Youngstown song, but there was the one, My Hometown or something. When I turned 18, I got a union card and something about going to the mill. I actually did that. I turned 18 and I said, okay, good. Now I'm official. I'm a man. I can get a job in the mill, and it's what we did. All I can tell you is, you know, it was August, probably about 100 degrees, 112% humidity, so it was a nice balmy day. And you had to go to work in your long johns, your thermals, and then when you got there, you had to put on asbestos, and you felt like it was like Kevlar. You walked around like, you know, just open up the blast furnace and throw that dolomite in there. And it was probably the same equipment that my grandfather worked on. You know, all my family, X amount of us worked in the mills, and you know, we had the guys in the railroad, the guys in the mill. We had some black sheep who went to college. I don't know what they were thinking, but it was you know, a typical Youngstown story. We had a blue collar life, and you know, we scraped our knuckles and we had some good times.
The steel mills were going full blast. The factories, the foundries, Anybody that wanted to work in Youngstown, you go find a job.
I've had 3 brothers, and my father was a steel mill worker.
My father and 4 of my uncles.
My dad worked in the steel mills.
I had a grandpa who worked there. McDonald works for 40 years, retired.
I remember as a kid, my grandfather, retiring from the mills and, doing the hard work that all the mill workers did, and my grandmother sort of being at home and taking care of the home fronts.
My grandfather worked at Traficant, Republic Steel. My father worked there for a time. I worked there for a time.
I had a 15-year career at U.S. Steel at both Youngstown and Lorraine Works.
I worked at the steel mills. Right out of high school, I went to the steel mills. I worked 2 years there.
I applied to all 3 here, Republic Sheet and Tube and U.S. Steel, and all 3 of them called me for a job.
We talk about the mill worker and these factory workers. These were guys that would go to work every day, not knowing if they'd be killed or maimed on the job.
My father worked, I think it was 46 years in Sharon Steel. His father worked, I don't know how many years it was, but he was an electrician, and there was a terrible accident. He died in the steel mill. He was working on a crane, and another craneman come down, didn't realize he was there, and crushed him.
I was actually working a midnight turn, the first midnight I ever worked, and they had me running a press. I'd never ran a press in my life. This big press would come down, it was making holes in these plates. And somebody on the other turn had wired up the, where you slide your foot through. They wired it up. I didn't know that. Well, when I put the plate in and I went to pull it back, it came off of one of the hooks in there. And I reached forward and I saw it coming, but it was too late. It crushed my hand.
We were, not a small part of Ohio. We were the heart of Ohio, I thought. And that's the way we looked at it with steel and the way we were helping the economy.
You didn't get rich, but you made a good living. You worked either 7 to 3, 3 to 11, or the midnight shift from 11 to 7. What that allowed for back in the day was for the bars around all the mills to be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
I mean, people would, you go out into a gin joint or a bar, I mean, you wouldn't leave the bar, there was 20 shots backed up, and they'd back you up over the phone. I mean, it was just a crazy time, a lot of fun.
I liked it. It was like if you had a job in the mill, you were set for the rest of your life. You had a good paying job, you had insurance, everything you needed, and your son could follow you and get a job.
Automatically, the steel mills, we invited everybody who looked for a job could find one. And the families created that kind of a tradition. You could always look out the door and say, when I graduate from high school, I'll go into the plant like my father did, spend 20, 30 years in there, have a decent pension, or at least have some money. They'll all have a car, they'll have a shotgun, they'll all go hunting and fishing and enjoy life.
When I was a kid and growing up, and even my teens and early 20s, it was wide open.
Well, how was the town, though, when you were younger? Wide open?
The town was wide open. Do you mean the boogies were wide open? Yeah, the boogies were wide open.
The 50s were the glory years of Youngstown. And everybody had money, and the entertainment was certainly very inexpensive.
It was a fun place to live, I mean, you could gamble, you could, do a lot of things. But looking back on it, it was a little dangerous.
I used to go in with my dad when I was a little kid and walk into these local joints and they'd put a dime in, the juking boards win money, video poker, just wide open.
In the early days, a man known as public enemy #1 in Buffalo, before authorities there ran him out of town, settled in Youngstown. Joe the Wolf DiCarlo, tied up with local hood Jasper Fats A. Leo, setting up a horse betting and numbers racket. From Michigan came another nationally known criminal, Frank Camerata, a member of Detroit's notorious Purple Gang. He tried to muscle in on the lucrative jukebox trade in Youngstown, but soon learned that other sharks already swam those waters. Then there was Warren Kingpin Tony the Dope Del Santer and his 2 powerful underlings, John and Mike Farah. The Farahs ran a lucrative gambling casino, the Jungle Inn, just outside of Youngstown city limits.
Well, they had a cage, and they had a guy up there with a machine gun, and the fellow that up there with the machine gun's an old acquaintance of mine, Danny Canonico, who's since died, sat up there in the turret with a gun, and he was there to protect it. Those places are always subject to being heisted.
people would say, you're almost like Vegas. We were Vegas. You could find any action you wanted, not too hard. I really didn't know gambling was illegal. If I was a teenager, really, this is really illegal. Gambling is, bar boot, craps. It was that open. We grew up as, we gambled a lot. We were going to the track since I was 7, and we grew up around, we had a couple bookmakers in our family, and it was all around sports. And it was really, really a lot of fun. It was nothing. I saw 10 Super Bowls back then. It was all degenerate gambles. We'd all get on, we'd get 200 of us, get on a plane and go to every Super Bowl. You went somewhere and the Youngstown people took it over.
You have to understand, in Youngstown, gambling was just a way of life. No one looked at it as an illegal activity.
There must have been a bookie joint about every block right on Federal Street. It took care of all the bug work.
The big money maker in the gambling was what was called the policy, which was also known as the lottery, clearinghouse, and Youngstown had a unique name for it. They called it the bug.
You could go to your local grocer, and they had these betting slips, and you can write out bug numbers, or what we call today lottery numbers.
It was a penny thing, and then
you play for a penny.
If you win, you got 500. Actually, the odds were 1,001, and they made quite a little bit of money.
Youngstown was just a more wide open town in terms of gambling and other vices than were Cleveland or Pittsburgh. So as a result, there was more money to be made in Youngstown than there was anywhere else.
And you could get down for any bet you wanted. You wanted to bet local games. I mean, high school games, it was nothing to be betting high school games, local high school games. Youngstown College at that time was Youngstown College. You could bet national sports. You could bet anything you wanted.
A writer once proclaimed that crime was to Youngstown what movies were to Hollywood and cars to Detroit. But in a pang of conscience in 1947, Youngstown elected Republican Charles P. Henderson mayor and police chief Edward Allen. They'd campaigned on a pledge to clean up the town and restore its respectability. Their slogan, "Smash Rackets Rule." They got the local phone company to literally pull the plug on Joe DiCarlo's horse race wire service, operated in bookie joints funded by seemingly legitimate businesses. Allen had his men round up the numbers runners, bugmen as they were called. They put such a crimp in DiCarlo's gambling operation that he left town and fled to Miami. But Chief Allen's biggest coup came where he had no jurisdiction. He convinced state authorities to conduct a massive raid of the Jungle Inn in August of 1949. All gambling equipment was smashed or confiscated, and the Jungle Inn was shut down by agents. Chief Allen and Mayor Henderson claimed victories in some battles during their 6 years in office, but when they left in 1953, they admitted that they had not won the war. Allen noted that the criminal element was deeply rooted in Youngstown and chastised residents for being willing participants. Crime was so prevalent in the area that Little Chicago and Crime Town are just a few of the labels that Youngstown was tagged with. Steel Town was perhaps the most noble. It reflected the very essence of the community. The strong ethnic mix produced a tough blue-collar class of people who worked hard by day and played just as hard by night. To compare a small city like Youngstown to a major one could engender a burst of civic pride, but the analogy was not meant to be complimentary. It's just that throughout the 20th century, both cities were infested with murderous gangsters. The gangland-style killings in Youngstown may not have been as frequent as those in Al Capone's day, but they were every bit as brutally violent.
I did a movie years ago with Al Pacino called Cruising, and we were sitting around one day. He asked me where I was from, and I told him. He says, are there any Italians in Youngstown?
No small town in America, Youngstown size, has had such a long history of organized crime.
I said, yeah, there's a couple of Italians in Youngstown.
Back to the first half of the 1900s,
You know, one of the reasons why the Youngstown and the Mahoning Valley was so mobbed up, as you might put it, is because of their proximity to Cleveland, which had a very deep organized crime and powerful organized crime family, and Pittsburgh, which also had a powerful organized crime, or La Cosa Nostra organization.
That's something that's well known in the city.
Yeah.
And it's gone on since I was AI.
When I was fighting, a lot of the guys, they were fans of mine. They were coming to my fights. They were, I was hanging out, bouncing around. You knew who they were. Everybody knew who everybody was. And then, this guy over here, he's on the school board. This guy's here as a city official. This guy's here running illegal activities, and I'm a fighter. But we're all sitting there having a drink together because, everyone's got their job. Everyone's carrying the lunch pail to the job. It's just different jobs. It's just a different line of work.
A lot of my fellow classmates' fathers were reportedly, in organized crime. They used to oftentimes drop the kids off to school, and a lot of them drove Cadillacs. And we used to talk about the fact that some of these Cadillacs had bomb detectors, in them. In case someone tried to wire your car with dynamite, it would set an alarm off or something. And we used to think that the Cadillac car company installed them, that they came with the car. And now we were, 6th grade, 5th grade, you know what I mean? But this was just something that we sort of took for granted because there were so many bombings in Youngstown.
They had bombings of government officials, councilmen's houses, to intimidate them.
The 50s were marked by no less than 80 unsolved bombings. Along with the explosions, the city also got a new demeaning label, Bomb Town. Most of the city's bombings in the 50s caused minor damage and rarely any injuries, but that would change drastically as Youngstown closed out the decade. City voters raised some eyebrows by electing ex-judge Frank Franco as mayor shortly after he'd been thrown off the bench for fixing parking tickets. Word quickly spread that the city would be wide open again and it would spell serious trouble. Even before Franco took office, a bomb blast rocked the city's north side, and Youngstown's sordid reputation moved up a notch on the sinister scale of shame, from Bomb Town to Murder Town, Ohio.
Well, during the 60s, there was a war that started for control of the rackets. Of course, in organized crime, there's oftentimes wars, and they get violent, they get bloody. In Youngstown, the weapon of choice became bombs. And the bombs were going off left and right during the 60s. Youngstown Tune-Up was the sort of a nickname given to a car bombing.
When there was a Youngstown Tune-Up or a bombing, you actually heard it.
One of the jokes was that a barber would cut your hair for $2, you would start your car for $3.
Unfortunately, that refers to somebody getting blown up in an automobile. That would be, if somebody wired your car with some sort of explosive device and you turned the key and you got blown up, you got tuned up. I just think it was a way of it's like gallows humor. This was so common in Youngstown that I think people couldn't really deal with the horror of what that is.
We lived on the south side, and there were a couple that occurred over on Market Street in the Uptown area, and you actually heard, and there was no doubt. Doesn't thunder on a clear night.
Youngstown's first notorious gangland killing took the life of Chris Sophocleus in Campbell in May 1959. He had just left the apartment of a lady friend on Park Avenue when he was blown away in a car bombing. Among those questioned in the bombing was Rising Rackets figure Ronnie the Crab Carabia. He too knew the woman, dubbed the Aluminum Blonde by the press because of the striking color of her hair. Others thought the killing of Sophocleus may have been linked to an underworld fight for control of the rackets, but like so many to come, the car bombing murder was never solved.
There was some Greek outfit here at Bar Boot at one time, but it was these
mob outfits came in, they started taking over. With the muscle they had, they didn't have much trouble getting them out of the way.
A year later, in the winter of 1960, one of the most sensational gangland killings in Youngstown's history took place. It claimed the life of racketeer S. Joseph Naples. Everybody called him Sandy. He'd done a long stretch in prison for severely beating a man in a robbery that netted just $2.12. Sandy made big headlines in 1958 while serving a gambling sentence in Mahoning County Jail. He was caught slipping out on weekends to see his girlfriend. It was going to see her, Mary Ann Varancich, that led to his demise. Old-timers said you could set your watch by it. Every night at 11, he'd arrive on her front porch on Caledonia Street on the city's south side. That night, 2 hitmen stepped out from the shadows and gunned him down. Mary Ann had just opened the door to greet him. She too was killed. Sandy emptied his .38 snub-nosed revolver. Police couldn't find any blood trails to indicate that he'd hit either of his fleeing assassins. A shotgun left at the scene and a machine gun found 2 years later in a nearby storm sewer were linked to the slayings, but nothing ever came of it. No one was ever charged. Following the slaying of Sandy Naples, another member of the mob hierarchy fell victim to a shotgun blast. Mike Farah of Jungle Inn fame was peppered with bullets outside his home in Warren. He was practicing his golf shot on the front lawn when gunmen fired from the backseat of a car that sped around the corner and kept going. The rumor mill had it that Cleveland gambling interests who were trying to muscle in may have knocked off Farah. The only thing known for fact was that the one-time king of the jungle would prowl the area no more. After Farah's demise, the method of killing changed, from shotguns back to bombs. The target acknowledged gambling overlord Vince De Niro. He had turned himself in for questioning in the Sandy Naples rub-out more than a year earlier. It had been rumored then that Naples had his eye on De Niro's gambling empire with intentions of moving up, but if there was a connection, it couldn't be proven then. He was released without charge. De Niro owned Cicero's restaurant on the south side. He left the establishment on a summer night, crossed Market Street to his parked convertible, turned the key in the ignition, and exploded. The force of the blast was so severe it shattered plate glass windows in 20 nearby businesses and shook homes from blocks around. One of the car's fenders was found on a nearby rooftop. A curious crowd quickly gathered to see what they had heard. Some came from miles away. It was a Sunday night, and authorities noted that if the blast had come earlier, it might have caught the crowd leaving the Uptown Theater. As it turns out, no one else was hurt. Riding high in the prime of his life, Vince De Niro was suddenly gone at the age of 39. A year later, the tit-for-tat theory surrounding the Naples De Niro slaying surfaced once again. Younger brother of Sandy Naples, Billy, was mangled in a car bombing on Madison Avenue on the north side. The blast said to be more powerful than the one that killed De Niro. Billy Naples was armed with a loaded revolver when the end came and was dressed in dark clothing. Police speculated that Naples may have been going out on a hit or burglary and was double-crossed. There had also been a number of unsolved safe crackings at the time. Billy had been driven to his rigged car by Dominic Moyo, a known bomb expert and arsonist from the Canton area. He became the prime suspect, but was never charged. With Sandy and Billy now gone, control of the family passed to younger brother, little Joey Naples.
I think it's a shame. The racketeers want to kill each other. It's all right with me.
As the bodies of gangland violence continued to pile up, citizens grew weary of the carnage and all but immune to the gruesome scenes of slaughter. Even the most hardened among them were not prepared for what happened 4 months after the Billy Naples slaying. The crime that shook the nation occurred at the North Side home of Cadillac Charlie Cavallero. It was the day after Thanksgiving. Cavallero was a self-proclaimed grape salesman that police believed had Mafia ties. He was getting into his car along with his 2 young sons. But when he turned the key, a tremendous explosion shook the neighborhood. All but disintegrated the car and collapsed the garage, killing Cavallero and his 11-year-old son, Tommy. Somehow, 12-year-old Chucky miraculously survived, but was maimed for life with a severe hip injury. Finally, it seemed, the people were outraged.
I think it's terrible. But it's really a shame that it had to happen to somebody that young. Someone who really doesn't even know what's going on yet.
The Cavallero bombing deaths drew nationwide attention at a time when Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy was convening a crime commission to try and expose and stamp out Mafia activity in the country. 40 FBI agents flooded the city of Youngstown and sifted through 3 years of gangland killing evidence. But despite good intentions, like all the other gangland hits in Youngstown, the Cavallero bombing was never solved. Or was it? Nearly a year after Cadillac Charlie's murder, the charred body of a man was found near a strip mine south of Canton. It was stuffed into the trunk of a burned-out car. The victim was shot in the head. It took fingerprints to identify the body as that of Dominic Moyo, the hitman for hire suspected in both the De Niro and Naples deaths. Lawmen speculated the mob itself put out a contract for botching the Cavallero job by inadvertently involving 2 innocent children.
Disbelief, anger, frustration. Maybe if you were an economic analyst you could see it coming, but if you were a steel worker raised with the single-minded thought of following your father into the mill for one of those jobs, you couldn't or wouldn't imagine what it would be like to have the blast furnaces ever cool down. Couldn't or wouldn't foresee the real-life economic horror of Black Monday.
Black Monday is indeed a dark day in Youngstown's history. It was the beginning of the end to its proud steelmaking legacy. The notification by the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company of shutdowns and massive layoffs was soon followed by similar announcements at both U.S. and Republic Steel. In a matter of 5 years, over 10,000 steelworkers lost their jobs, and thousands more in related businesses were also unemployed. As Ronald Reagan practiced Reaganomics in Washington, more and more residents of Youngstown found themselves without a way to pay the bills.
People don't realize how overwhelming it was. Suddenly they say, you're done, and guess what else? There's no pension. There's nothing now. You're through.
My generation really messed things up a little bit. They weren't prepared for something like that. We had all our eggs in one basket.
Whole neighborhoods just disappeared.
You know, people were angry that the mills were going down in Youngstown because we were all under the impression that they were making money. You know, why ship everything overseas? That was our first thought.
And, you know, unemployment, you know, leads to alcoholism, leads to, you know, some mental illness, leads to divorces. Pretty depressed as a whole.
Well, there's people leaving town like crazy. They used to have a bumper sticker that was on the cars that said the last person leaving Youngstown, turn the lights out.
We've been trying to get past steel for 30 years in this town. We've been talking about getting past steel for 30 years in this town.
This community's identity was challenged. The sense of who we are and what makes us who we are, if that was all about the steel industry, and the steel industry is not going to be there anymore, then who are we? Who are we as individuals? Who are we as a community? And I think that really became a struggle for this place, and that became, sadly, the struggle that in some ways we never won.
It's like any other town where the major employer leaves. It's step by step, piece by piece, job by job, and we're doing it.
Since the closing of the steel mills, we've had a lot of people write about Youngstown, but they were largely outsiders, true outsiders, and their sense of what Youngstown was far different from the people who had gone through it and experienced the economic decline.
We know how to cope. We know how to deal with stuff, and we will survive. We are surviving against all odds, against the national media wanting to always point to Youngstown as Youngstown. That's the pits. There's a lot of that.
This is the only town that fought the economic restructuring, that fought the deindustrialization, that tried to purchase the mills, who went to Washington. It was unique in among American cities that were going through economic restructuring. They fought. This town fights.
You know, people want to work, I believe that, and unfortunately, with the loss of, I think, 40,000 steel jobs, manufacturing jobs within maybe a 10-year period in the late 70s and early 80s, just took that opportunity away. And obviously, then, I would guess, there were consequences to our society.
Concurrent with the departure of the mills, profits from drugs began playing a larger role in Y-Town. Yet it was the fight for control of all rackets that triggered another round of gangland slayings in the late 1970s. At this time, the Cleveland faction of the Cosa Nostra had their hands full with a fiery gangster known as the Irishman Danny Green. After several assassination attempts backfired, they hired some professional hitmen, one of whom was Ronnie Carabia. On October 6, 1977, the Irishman was blown to bits in a Cleveland parking lot. He had received his own Youngstown tune-up. Witnesses identified Erie, Pennsylvania's Ray Ferrito as one of the other hitmen. Ferrito turned state's evidence and testified for the government against the mob and their associates, including Ronnie Carabia. He would serve a little less than 25 years and be released on parole in 2002. With the Cleveland family in disarray, a sudden rash of murder swept through Youngstown, involving Mafia associates from both the Cleveland and Pittsburgh factions, reminiscent of the turf wars from the early 60s.
It started here, outside this prisoner halfway house in Youngstown. James Pepys Canonico was staying here. As he returned home one night, he was shot to death in the parking lot.
Canonico had protected Joey Naples when both were serving time in Allentown. It's believed Naples gave the green light to Canonico to start a gambling operation in Cleveland territory. Profits would be shared with the Pittsburgh faction of the mob where Naples was aligned. Canonico's demise and the killing of his henchman Charles Spider Grisham, shot with a high-powered rifle outside his home, was thought to be the work of hitman Joe DeRose Jr. Informants said that he bragged about the killings, vowing that Joey Naples would be next. Again, informants say that Naples, now fearing for his life, struck back. Cleveland associate Dominic Cenzarino was shotgunned to death outside of his home. 2 months later, one of the Carabia brothers, Charlie, suddenly vanished after leaving his home for an alleged sit-down meeting with Little Joey and a man named Briar Hill Jimmy Prado. Charlie's car was found abandoned on a Cleveland street several days later. He was never found. Over a year later, Joe DeRose Jr. himself disappeared. A car he was known to be driving was found burning on a country road between Cleveland and Akron. DeRose was not in it, but has never been seen again.
That's how the mob works. Violence and the threat of violence or intimidation, and of course, corruption of government officials.
Well, I would say that, without being specific, there were so many people compromised in the area of politics and police, law enforcement. It was everywhere.
In April of 1987, the FBI capped several years of investigation by staging massive gambling raids in the area. The main focus, a building in Camel. Its shabby exterior maligned what authorities found behind closed doors. Pittsburgh associates Dante and Lenny Strolla were charged with running the casino. A half dozen others for being a part of the numbers operation. The All-American Club, a gambling den, not unlike the old Jungle Inn of decades earlier, was suddenly out of business. Those caught up in the raid given various prison terms. 2 lawmen were also implicated, Sheriff's Deputy Mike Terlecki and Bill Rico, a nearby police chief, for accepting bribes to protect gambling activity. It was around this time that Joey Naples turned himself in on a gun charge. After his release from jail, conflicting rumors circulated about Little Joey. One had him moving up in the Pittsburgh crime family, another that he was going to retire in Florida. But in 1991, he was building a new home just outside of Youngstown in nearby Beaver Township. Neighbors heard 4 or 5 gunshots. Naples was found dead in the driveway.
Shell casings were found in a cornfield across the street from where Mr. Naples was building his house. Police theorized that the killer crouched there in that cornfield and waited for Mr. Naples to come home and then fired the fatal shots.
A search of the cornfield yielded several shells, but little else. A car with California plates was found at the scene but failed to provide any concrete proof. No one was charged.
The Cosa Nostra, the Mafia, compared to other organized crime groups, they do not like the idea of killing innocent bystanders. It's against their rules. It's not good for publicity, it's just against their rules. It's not in their nature. Same thing with government officials, judges, police officers. There have been exceptions. There have been exceptions in the country, there have been exceptions in Youngstown.
Shooting took place Christmas Eve, 1996.
The gunman entered through the garage door, which Gaines had not closed after letting his cats out. Police say they don't have a motive yet, but feel this is not a case of attempted burglary or robbery.
1996, Jim Filomena is running for re-election. Basically, around here, the election is a Democratic primary. There hasn't been a Republican who's won around here in a few decades.
I ran against a fellow by the name of James Filomena. He was the incumbent. He had been prosecutor. He was prosecutor from 1989 until the end of 1996.
So Paul Gaines is this, he's part of a law firm, and he's taking on Jim Filomena, who has organized crime connections.
Corruption was there from the beginning. I mean, at all levels, local, state, to a lesser level, federal. And there were payoffs, there were bribes.
And he mentioned $15,000, and I said no. He started bidding. He said, how about 20? Then he said 25, and finally it dawned on, you really don't want the money? No, I don't want the money. I have my own money. I don't need your money. Those days are gone. Unfortunately, for them, I don't subscribe to that culture.
We don't know for sure if Filomena had requested that someone take out Gaines, but it is known that people in organized crime here hired a hitman to go and shoot Gaines in his house.
The reason that I survived the shooting is because the revolver jammed.
In typical Mahoning Valley fashion, the gun's not working. So he's clicking, trying to kill Gaines, and finally gives up. I think he shot him twice.
That was unheard of, to go after a county prosecutor. It was really unheard of. But, in crime, even in so-called organized crime or the mob, criminals aren't really used to playing by the rules. So it's not unusual for the rules to be broken.
It was just so outrageous. I mean, it was so obvious that, they were trying to kill this guy because he was a guy who didn't show a willingness to play ball with them.
The federal government stepped in, and they really did a tremendous job in I don't know how many, dozens and dozens and dozens of prosecutions of organized crime figures and government officials.
Paul Gaines recovered and was sworn into the office of county prosecutor. After a lengthy investigation led nowhere, authorities received a tip which resulted in the arrest of the hired hitman and his getaway drivers. The wannabe gangsters rolled over on the real players behind the hit, including Lenny Strollo, who in exchange for a severely reduced sentence would go on to flip and testify for the FBI in several key trials. With all the arrests and convictions in the late 1990s, including policemen, attorneys, judges, and a few wise guys, the feds were finally flexing some muscle in Youngstown. It only took the better part of a century. Next, they would set their sights on catching Youngstown's own white whale.
I always said that only Youngstown could produce a guy like Jim Traficant, and support him.
I want your vote, even if I'm in prison.
Traficant gets the most play, obviously, because he was a congressman, and he was our. And not only was he just he wasn't even like a run-of-the-mill congressman. He was, he was our Jimbo, and just even saying that could bring a smile to someone's face. Like, oh yeah, our Jimbo, we love that guy. He really, stuck up for us. He was really out for for the small guy.
A colorful character who, coming from the viewpoint of an author, should have a book written about him.
I like the guy. I know him personally. I liked him. I feel horrible the way that transpired, what has happened to him.
Started out as the tough-talking county sheriff. Before that, he was involved in like an anti-crime task force, anti-drug task force.
I had a crime lab here. I ran a crime lab in Youngstown, and he was a sheriff.
And I will tell you, he brought more drugs into that crime lab in the time he was sheriff than you could imagine. I mean, he was pretty active, and I thought he did a good job.
He really seemed to capture that inner anger and that feeling that people had in this area that we weren't given a fair shake. When the mills closed, the federal government abandoned us, state government abandoned us, and so here was this guy, this tough-talking sheriff who was going to stand up for us.
When he was a sheriff, a lot of people felt that he did the type of service to them that made him feel proud.
One of the things he did was, while the banks were looking to foreclose on people's properties, he refused to execute those warrants to kick people out of their houses and became sort of a folk hero.
The sheriff appeared without counsel. He told the court he would represent himself. Traficant believes the foreclosures serve no purpose. He believes the monies from the sheriff's sale go to stuff the wallets of the mob and other fat cats, as he put it. Traficant said local banks and judges have to start watching out for those who have worked all of their lives to purchase a home, and he wants the state legislature to get involved with laws to protect those people. In closing, the sheriff said it was not his intent to blatantly violate a court order, but he wanted the law to start serving the people.
I'm gonna go to jail. I think that's evident.
Did you really expect
Geez, they really even patted me down. They even checked my crotch.
When he was sheriff, obviously there was a big connection between him and organized crime, to the point that he was federally indicted.
The indictment alleges that then-sheriff candidate Traficant solicited and accepted $163,000 from his co-conspirators with the understanding that in exchange he would allow certain illegal activities to occur in Mahoning County, Ohio, and that as sheriff he would not interfere with those activities.
Traficant had been taped by Charlie Carabia shortly before his disappearance. On the tape, newly elected Sheriff Traficant discusses his acceptance of over $160,000 from rival Mafia factions.
Traficant is accused of taking bribes from alleged organized crime leaders in the Mahoning Valley and cheating on his 1980 tax return by not reporting the money. The government hopes to portray Traficant as a corrupt politician who willingly took the mob's money and looked the other way. The sheriff says he was conducting his own probe of organized crime and had to temporarily become part of it to be accepted.
He defended himself in lieu of an attorney. He said he would defend himself, which everyone thought was suicide. But as it turned out, it was a move of genius, because what he was able to do in the mind of the jury, and I think I'm not wrong here, is that he painted Youngstown as corrupt, as everybody being corrupt, and therefore he was engaging in his own private sting operation. Why? He couldn't trust anybody. He couldn't trust the mayor. He couldn't trust the prosecutors. He couldn't trust the police department, blah, 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 on and on. So that if everybody in the town is corrupt, who do you go to? You see? And once he convinced the jury of that, which, by the way, was true, it may have been true on that end. It may also have been true that he was also corrupt. But he dirtied the water enough that people thought, well, if that's true, then who's corrupt here?
He was able actually to get a hung jury. He wasn't actually acquitted, but he got a hung jury, and the federal government was like, well, this is just going to be insane. We're never going to find a jury that's going to convict this guy.
And then he goes on to be elected to Congress. I mean, go figure.
I was just thinking about my baby, kind of girl that makes me feel so good, so fine, so good, so fine.
He wasn't involved in any of those, alliances that you have to get involved in to get anything done, to get any legislation pushed through. He was a maverick.
They did finally get him back in 2002.
When it's all over, they better win.
Jim Traficant seemed very somber and intent as he arrived at the courthouse. By contrast, prosecutor Craig Morford seemed almost carefree, an uncharacteristic spring in his step. But once inside, the two adversaries made their final pleas to the jury. First up, Morford told the jury to forget all the cotton candy and the diversions by Traficant and focus on one fact, that the congressman broke the law through a repeated pattern of corrupt activity. Then it was the congressman's turn. He says the government has treated the Constitution like it was toilet paper. Then Traficant emphasized what he says is the major flaw in the government's case, a lack of physical evidence.
When the jury comes back, that'll speak volumes.
An 8-year prison term for the convicted ex-congressman. In Mahoning County, the reaction was mixed.
I think he earned his 8 years.
I would vote for him 1,000 times. He wasn't no crooked than the rest. And I'm not talking about everybody is crooked, but he just did what he had to do. He needed some money. That's the law of survival.
I'm thrilled at his sentence.
The former congressman may be incarcerated tonight, but some feel the final chapter in the Traficant saga is not over.
I would never totally underestimate him, but I say for at least 8 years it is.
As for his career in Congress, Traficant claims he became more dangerous to the Democrats after the popularity from the ethics hearings, and that's why they voted him out before they recessed for summer.
I want you to disregard all of the opposing counsel has said. I think they're delusionary. I think they've had something funny for lunch in their meal. I think they should be handcuffed to a chain link fence, flogged, and all of their hearsay evidence should be thrown the hell out. And if they lie again, I'm going to go over and kick them in the crotch. Thank you very much.
We've had a trial by jury. We've had a trial in the Ethics Committee. We went over all the facts in the Ethics Committee. The Ethics Committee voted unanimously for expulsion. So I think the Congress is going to act today, the House is going to act as it should under its rules.
I still have some rights as an American. Third of all, Gephardt has no and he can go himself.
I will take with me a file, a chisel, a knife. I'll try and get some major explosives, try and fight my way out. Then when I get out, I'll grab a sword like Maximus Meridius, Domitius, and as a gladiator, I'll stab people in the crotch.
I liked him for his voting record, and I abhorred his behavior.
They shunned him. Nobody wanted to be connected to him. Yeah, he mooned guys, but what good does that do us?
Jim Traficant was more of a populist, and he was a kind of a polarizing figure at the national level. That's not the direction that we need to head in.
In 2002, Jim Traficant was convicted of taking bribes, racketeering, and tax evasion. After his expulsion from Congress, he was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. He served over 7 and was released at the age of 68 on September 2nd, 2009. At the dawn of the 20th century, roughly 100 years after John Young founded the city, a Jewish immigrant named Benjamin Warner settled his family in Youngstown. It was here that Benjamin Warner's sons first ventured into show business, projecting silent films to the amazement of residents in the booming industrial town.
It was in 1905 that one of the brothers, Sam Warner, got into the motion picture business. And he started out as a camera operator, where he stood there and hand cranked the camera, came home, talked to his brothers and his father and said, we got to get into this is big. And so they started with the theater side of it, opening Nickelodeons. Their first theater was in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, which is about 25 miles down the river here from Youngstown. But eventually they opened several theaters here in the Mahoning Valley and in Youngstown. In order to be very successful in motion pictures, they needed to have what you would call vertical integration, meaning they had to go from production all the way up to distribution and running the theaters. And so that's how they built their business. It started here in the teens. They moved out of Youngstown. Two of the brothers went to New York to handle the financial end. Two went to Hollywood to do the production end of it. Again, this is where the idea germinated. This is where it started. And what's really interesting about that theater on West Federal Street is that they built it in 1931 for 2 reasons. One was to honor their late brother Sam, who was the technical genius of the 4 brothers. who had died in 1927, but the other one was to say thank you to the people of Youngstown for supporting them when they got their start in the business. And I don't think they ever forgot that.
The Warner brothers would go on to become Hollywood legends, but they would not be the last success story to come out of Youngstown.
Our Historical Society recently purchased a building on West Federal Street in downtown Youngstown. This building, back in 1922, was owned by a man named Harry Burt.
While working in his Youngstown ice cream parlor, Harry Burt invented a delicious new treat, chocolate-covered ice cream on a stick. He called his convenient creation the Good Humor Bar, and it would eventually catch on throughout the nation.
And it was from there that the whole good humor icon, that brand, was launched. And he's the one who bought trucks with ice cream coolers on the back that were painted white with drivers in white suits that went through the neighborhoods, ringing their bell, selling good humor bars almost door to door, that you still see happening in neighborhoods all over the country. And that happened right here in Youngstown, Ohio.
I do voices. I'm a voice actor and a singer, and it's basically the stuff that used to get me kicked out of class, and here I am. Moved to LA in '79, got married the first time, and I made a demo tape back in '84, and I was working at a video store at the time, and passed it along to one of our customers who produced some B sort of horror movies, and he said, well, I'll pass it along. He actually did, to Don Bluth, who did The Secret of NIMH. He was a big-time Disney animator, and moved on to do his own thing. And he said, well, I'm not doing anything right now, I'll hold on to your tape. He actually did. Guy called me 6 weeks later. I auditioned for a job for the role of Lionel on Dumbo Circus for Disney Channel. I got that gig, and that went 120 shows, so by the time that was done, I was doing radio spots, TV spots, and you know, the rest is mystery. The first big splash was probably Darkwing Duck.
Because I am the terror that flaps in the night, you know. I'm just saying. Darkwing, right here.
And from there, we went on to Tailspin and good old King Louis, baby. And Don Carnage, he's too amazing. And I mean, on, and
oh, Tasmanian Devil, of course. And we can't forget Winnie the Pooh, because without him, well, there would be no smackrels of honey to share. And Tigger, death on the bouncing, that's ridiculous. You gotta throw him in there. I'm just saying.
My father started when he was in 6th grade. My step-grandfather was an immigrant who could not speak the language. My dad would figure out that estimates and the budgets and this and that, so he acquired his work ethic very early. He went in the service. He was in the Army Corps of Engineers. He designed bridges. He came back here in, I believe it was like 1944, from his tour of duty in Okinawa, Japan, married my mother, started the company, so it was right in the mid-40s.
So many creative people, so many wonderful folks came out of Youngstown. You know, I think it was just so fertile. I don't know what it was. I think it was a combination of all the different backgrounds of the people and everything, and it was a great mix. It's kind of like, you know, the Beatles didn't come from a very perfect background either. I think there's something about, you know, folks who are very real and very positive at the same time and don't give up. You know, you know, it does something to your soul. It gives you a little extra boost, you know, and I think we have that from Youngstown. So many, whether it's world-class athletes, boxers, singers, guitar players, accountants, florists.
The people in our area have a decent amount of book smarts, but what they have exceptionally is street smarts.
Yes. Yes.
They know how to think on their feet. That's I think one of the strongest qualities of our area is the street smarts of our people.
I really actually was appointed by my father president of the Pittsburgh Penguins hockey team. It was during that time that we went to Canada and acquired Marion Lemieux. I mean, it was an exciting time. We won our first Stanley Cup, and then a year later our second. I was the first female. My name was engraved on the Stanley Cup.
Under the control of Denise's brother, Edward DeBartolo Jr., the San Francisco 49ers won 5 Super Bowl championships from 1981 to 1994.
Just the type of people that have come out of this area in all phases of sports. And in my own way, I've tried to do the same thing, because everybody knows that anybody from Youngstown just goes out and wins.
Youngstown has produced success stories that span all walks of life and fields of interest, maybe none more so than in professional sports.
Youngstown's one of the best places, man, fighters come out of, man. Yeah, what, five world champions out of this town. You know, we don't get no recognition at all. None. In 1980 is when I was going to the Olympics. Carter boycotted me, so that blew my chances, so I turned pro and won a world belt.
We've got Kelly the Ghost Pavlik. He's a middleweight champion.
I started it as a hobby, you know, never expecting somebody like Kelly would walk through my door, but, you know, he did, and the rest is history.
The climb was, it was frustrating. I mean, you sit there and it's hard to go 7 years undefeated. I don't care if people say you're fighting guys with one arm. I mean, anybody that throws a punch at you has a chance, and this happens to so many young kids. But a lot of these fighters, you know, that I came up on an Olympic team with, even in 2000 class, you know, have world title shots after 3.5, 4 years. And for me, I was in there just dominating everybody they were putting in front of me. But I wasn't even getting network television, you know, coverage. You know, there was still no talks of a world title fight. So it really got frustrating. And at one point, I just said, well, who I got to fight next? You know, Godzilla, you know, for this title. And then we got the break.
When he fought Jermaine Taylor for the world title, that fight represented this city.
I was going there to fight not only for the world title, but I was fighting a great athlete. You know, a guy who was dominant. He's beaten the middleweight king and Bernard Hopkins twice.
Knocked down in the second round. How many people across this United States, across the world watching that fight said, that's it?
I called it when I seen Kelly go down in the second round. I knew he wasn't down because he's a Youngstown boy. And a Youngstown boy is proud, and I knew he was getting up.
Unfortunately, that knockdown, in a good way, unfortunately, you know, because I say that I had to get knocked down. It's not ever good to get knocked down, but it was just amazing how that knockdown worked out and how that fight ended up. I mean, definitely for Youngstown and the way people, the image that Youngstown carries now, I mean, that was great for it. But even everything else, you know, Ohio State Buckeyes use that, the Cleveland Browns use that as a, you know, you keep getting knocked down, but don't give up and put everything that you have, you know, into it. And so I guess it turned out to be, you know, a great thing that happened. You know, unfortunately at the time it wasn't, but, you know, and that's the way everybody looks at Youngstown. So I think it's, maybe you look growing up in Youngstown, maybe that's just the way I was bred, you know, the way I was born.
How about Boom?
Boom, I saw him in Warren only, but I saw him.
No, his dad.
Oh, no, I saw him mostly in town more than the fights. Like I was saying, at the Rainwood Auditorium, I couldn't find a quarter to get in for crying out loud.
Think of any of us, what we gave our dad when we were 12 years on Father's Day. And we'd probably buy him a tie or something. Ray gave his dad a poem. And you know, his dad was a #1 contender, had to go to war, got shot up, he come back, boom. And the poem is, I walk in your shadow. I promise you, Dad, that I will win for you the lightweight title of the world. I will wear that belt in your name.
WBA rules on the 10-point scoring system. Mancini in red trunks, the champion, Frias in black trunks.
Tim, Alexis Arguello said that the only chance that Art Frias has is to box Mancini. Now, we know that's not his style. Let's see if he does try to change the box. It doesn't look like it from now.
Good left hand by Frias. Staggered Mancini. Mancini getting his balance back and now comes back with a two-fisted attack. And while we watch Frias practice boxing all week in training, we had the feeling he'd be out there in his club style once the bell went, and that's what's happened. A slugfest in the opening round. So look at this, look at this exchange. Mancini and Frias just battering right back. Now blood from the nose of Ray Mancini. And remember that likewise, Gil, is not considered a problem with Ray. He bleeds easily from the nose. He lands a big left hook to the face of the champion. And a right hand, and that staggered Frias. Mancini has Frias in trouble. What a war, down goes Frias. The champion is on the floor. Art Frias, with less than 30 seconds to go now in this first round.
Well, he better get on his bicycle now. He better get on his bicycle.
Mancini jumps all over him, and he is in trouble on the ropes. Ray Mancini has the champion Frias in more trouble. It's target practice for Mancini. Throwing those non-stop punches he's famous for. Frias, it is all over as referee Richard Green has stopped the bout. A sensational a round as you'll ever see in a World Championship fight for a first round. They're usually a feel-out round. Not today. There is bedlam in the ring, as you can see. There are many supporters here from Youngstown, and it looks like all of them from buses and trains and cars and planes have all jammed in to the ring. There is Ray Mancini. We're going to be talking to him in a moment. There's his dad. Let's go back into the action in round one.
Everybody was crying because a dream has come true. Not only for this 21, 22-year-old young man, but this pretty old guy that has been in the war, and the war has finally been won. What did it mean? It meant a real Rocky story. I mean, it was for real.
Sports is the glue here. It really is. Always has been.
I played football for Youngstown State University when Dyke Beattie was still coaching there. I remember the first game I played for Youngstown State. It was in Rand Stadium, because they didn't have at that time they didn't have a stadium. So we used the high school, the city schools. And we were on the 50-yard line. And they played day games. And my parents were, at the game. And I remember I looked up and I said, "Hey, Dad, how you doing?" And he said, "Fine, how's it going?" He could hear me. There wasn't any noise. It was like silence. There was no cheering. The only cheering was the cheerleaders on the side. They would cheer. Nobody would cheer with them because nobody cared. It was high school football was everything in Youngstown. But at that time, Youngstown State, nobody cared. So there was no noise. And I'll tell you a funny story. There was an announcer that used to work all the games for years and years and years. His name was Don Gardner, and he was a fixture, in the sporting world in Youngstown. And he had a toupee, a funny little toupee, like a spiked crew cut. We used to listen to the games occasionally on the radio. And I remember that Youngstown State was trying to kick a field goal. And, we're waiting, and he says, line up, the Penguins line up on the 35-yard line. This should be, we're 25-yard line, 35-foot boot. Straight away, not much wind. There's a snap, the kick is up, it's up, the kick is up, it's no good, it's too high. And we're thinking, how can a kick be too high? How can it be too high? It's off to the left, it's off to the right. It's not too high. This was Youngstown State University football. When I played there, they had no sleds, no blocking sleds, no dummies, nothing. We just go out in the field, run around, Oh my God. But,
Well, I think the Youngstown athlete, you always start with that tough blue collar, not afraid to get his hands dirty and put the work in. But you also see a lot of really talented kids that come out of here. I mean, it's not just hard work.
Well, I think that's one of the special things about Youngstown and our area is we're not afraid or ashamed to say that football and sports and the competitive spirit is important.
Youngstown routinely contributes top sporting prospects year in and year out. Michael Zordich Jr. is just one example of the tradition. His father, Michael Zordich Sr., played in the NFL for 12 seasons.
It's something I've loved to do my whole life. Hopefully, see what I can do in college. Maybe if I perform well, I can get to the next level. But just the fact that what Youngstown does for us, and a lot of people have come out of Youngstown because of sports, and this area is known for sports.
Michael's high school teammate Dan McCarthy helped lead the Cardinal Mooney football team to the state championship in all 4 years of high school, claiming victory twice. He too looks ahead to a bright future in the sport.
My ultimate dream's playing in the NFL someday, but I think as I go on in life, there's a lot of things that I'll take with me from Youngstown, at Cardinal Mooney that'll carry me as I go on in life.
Ron Stoops Sr. served as defensive coordinator at Cardinal Mooney High School for 28 years. At the age of 54, he suffered a fatal heart attack on the sidelines during a game. His son, Ron Jr., was coaching against his father from the opposite sideline on that tragic night. Today, he holds his father's old post, coaching defense at Cardinal Mooney High.
My father's a high school coach. My Uncle Bob was a high school coach. I was the oldest of the four boys, and I went right into high school coaching, and I've enjoyed that ever since. My three younger brothers all went to college. They went to the University of Iowa, and they all had great playing careers there. And it was more of a natural progression for them than to go into become graduate assistants and then start working their way up through the college ranks. And Bob did it, and Mike followed his path, and then Mark followed his path. And I'm very, very proud of their accomplishments, and Bob was fortunate enough to win a national championship in 2000, and the town really was very supportive, and Jim Tressel has spoken a lot about that too, that the town of Youngstown, the loyal people, hardworking, and obviously he had great success as a coach here in this town, and then he obviously has turned that into great success at Ohio State.
Here's my last story about Youngstown State University. Honest to God, this is a true story. We're playing Pensacola Naval Station, okay? At the time, Roger Staubach was their quarterback. He had just graduated, from the Naval Academy, where he was an All-American, and then he went down and was doing his, they got to do 6 years active service after they graduate, before he was able to go to the Dallas Cowboys. So he's playing for them. Prior to the game, that week of practice, Dyke calls us all together as a team. We're kneeling down, freezing cold. We used to practice in a field out in Liberty. He starts telling us about the game that week and what their scouting reports said and so forth, which is typical. This is what's not typical. He started talking about Roger Starbuck, called him. Starbuck. In my estimation, the finest football player in collegiate football today, maybe of all time. Now, we know this. We know Starbuck's a great player. Here's the kick, though. Now, in my opinion, there's no possible way we can win this game. I swear to God. He told us we couldn't win. But I think we can give them a pretty good god-darn run for their money. That's what this week's all about. We're going to practice hard. We're going to give them a good run for their money. Now, we're not going to win. Can't beat them. Let's go.
When I think about what sports means in Youngstown, I think about a typical Youngstown person who maybe works this blue-collar job and doesn't like it and lives for the weekends. He lives for the high school football games on Friday, and he lives to watch Ohio State and Youngstown State on Saturdays, and he lives, to see the Browns, and maybe he had a lousy week, but seeing one of those teams win, makes him feel a little bit better about where he's at.
The only thing that has been a bad development, I think, is and it started in the late 70s, is the influx of Pittsburgh Steelers fans into the area.
That's bad.
Yeah, you could see the mullets and the missing teeth. They started.
That's terrible.
Yeah, they started reproducing. There's a lot of them now, and so it's like the hillbillyization of Youngstown a little bit.
In the 70s.
But other than that,
started in the 70s.
Yeah, but other than that, it's great.
In February 2009, world boxing champion Kelly Pavlik defended his middleweight title in front of a hometown crowd at the Covelli Center in downtown Youngstown, an arena that Jim Traficant helped bring to the city just before his run as a congressman evaporated.
Let's get down and rock and roll!
Even in the worst economic recession of Pavlik's lifetime, his hometown fans showed up in droves. The event sold out. Kelly won by TKO.
Right now is where we're pushing forward and fighting.
Today, the population is at its lowest point in over 100 years. After 3 decades of wishful thinking, reality has set in with city leaders. And the goal now is to shrink Youngstown, demolish the blight of long-abandoned buildings, and move forward.
We want this area to move forward. We had such a bad name as far as crime, Bomb City, years ago, things that were said on TV, on national news. And we don't need that. Again, we want to move this city in the right direction.
Youngstown seems a city primed for metamorphosis. Growing technology businesses and plans of renovating office buildings for lofts provide hope for downtown. children and grandchildren of steelworkers graduate from Youngstown State University with degrees their predecessors never needed.
I feel badly for Youngstown. I can't imagine how it's going to come back. You know, I can't really envision it the way it used to be because the mills are gone. I don't know how you replace the mills.
I think we've learned and grown up, and I think we're better off because of what has happened in the past, and we're more aware and smarter.
I'm so proud of this city from the standpoint that you still have 82,000 people fighting in this city, given the fact that you lost your major employer that built this area. And the fact that you have that and that there are people here still to this day looking to turn this thing around and make this the example of post-industrial revitalization for all cities across the United States, that to me is what I want to be a part of, because that to me is the Youngstown that I know as a fighter. This is the first generation that's removed completely from those days of the mills. I don't remember the mills. I don't remember how things were, what happened. I'm not cynical. I'm here saying, this is a great culture. This is a tough environment. We're going to redefine this area, and we're going to look the United States in the eyes and say, this is how you do it. If you want to know how you turn cities around that built this country, you come to Youngstown to figure that out.
And people always, whether it be at DeBartolo or Carmen Policy or Ray Mancini, people always say, I'm from Youngstown. And I don't care where I go, I'm from Youngstown. And we're recognized, good, bad, or in between. They know Youngstown.
If you're going to be an authentic, genuine candidate, if you're going to be able to stand the tough questions and deal with the tough issues, you have to come to Youngstown, Ohio.
Thank you, Youngstown!
Right now, I'm not going to lie either. Youngstown's struggling pretty good, and that's just an obvious.
I don't think we can go any further south. I think all we can do is go up.
There's no doubt that this town's going to survive.
I don't know if it's in the water or in the air or what it is, but you won't find a more persevering and resilient people than you'll find in Youngstown. You can knock them down, you can beat them up, but they're going to get back off the canvas time in and time again.
All I know is I go back and forth to church every Sunday and pray and hope to wake up the next day. That's all you can do around here, just try and live the right way.
It takes the people here in Youngstown. It takes the people that live around the surrounding area, to sit there and put the efforts in. And I think if everybody does that, along with your politicians that could bring stuff back, I think Youngstown definitely could be back in 10, 15 years.
Just even new buildings, just anything for downtown Youngstown to get it back to where it was. I definitely feel like it's gonna be back on the rise.
I don't know if there's going to be a happy ending to Youngstown, is what I'm saying. But then again, I'm a pessimist, so.
And it might take us 30 more years to do it, but I'll tell you what, every single one of those days, 365 days for the next 30 years, until I'm dead, until they incinerate me, until they spread me over that Mahoning River right there, I'm going to be fighting to the end. And I'll tell you what, I know I'm going to bring an army with me, and how many of those people are going to bring an army with them? And for 30 years, we're going to fight. And if it takes 30 years, if it takes 50 years, we're going to do it.
With lessons learned the hard way and all the scars to prove it, though battered and bruised, like so many of the fighters she produced, Youngstown, Ohio, is still standing.
Youngstown has its own language. People would refer to each other usually as Mo or Charlie.
Mo, how you doing? Charlie, I blew a skate yesterday. I blew a skate trying to jog.
You heard about Jimmy. Jimmy got jammed up. He's jammed up. Which would mean he's in trouble with the police.
People don't have an injured leg, they have a bad wheel. All right? No, he hurt his wing last week. He hurt his shoulder, his arm.
How's Johnny Boy doing? Raymond, people disappear all the time.
I mean, there's a lot of people disappear all the time.
No one really knew anybody's real name. I mean, they always had some kind of a nickname.
Cherry Nose Santillo.
There's Joe Rat. There's Bogus Calderon.
Abadab San Martino.
Yeah.
Abadab San Martino.
There was Kangaroo Lasasso.
Flophouse DePietro.
Dishpan and Boogie Vicaro.
This guy's he's become a headache. Hey, people could disappear all the time. People disappear all the time. You know, I find myself saying that.
Well, these are the kinds of sayings that you hear in Youngstown, and only in Youngstown.
I was doing a play in Philadelphia one time, and I was at a club, a bar. Two guys came in. Jam. Place is jam. I don't know anybody. And the bartender is down waiting on these two guys. And I overhear the conversation. The one guy says, "How'd you do last night?" The guy said, "I did pretty good." The other guy with him says, "Man, this guy couldn't get lucky in a Chinese whorehouse with a 100-pound sack of rice." And I said, "That guy's from Youngstown." Not only was he from Youngstown, he was a cousin of mine who hadn't been in Youngstown in 20 years because he had passed bad checks.
Our lifeblood up and moved away. On a Monday said goodbye. The city just rolled up its sleeves. There was no time to cry. With hands of dirt and collars blue, working more than 9 to 5. People doing what they can to keep their town alive. This is our town, where my grandfather was born. This is our town, where we no longer mourn. This is our town, we're not wounded anymore. Still strong as steel in Youngstown. As yourself, and your neighbor does the same. From the Mill Creek up through Briar Hill, everybody knows your name. With muddy boots and a rusty belt, the time clock always punched. These people may not have a lot, but for them they have enough. For them they have enough. This is our town, where my grandfather was born. This is our town, where we no longer mourn. This is our town, we're not wounded anymore. Still strong as steel and pushing and working and slaving, trying, complying, behaving, earning and scrimming and saving. Oh, oh, drinking and gambling and playing, praying and hearing, obeying, gaining and giving and paying. Oh, oh, oh. Reputation undeserved, the print not always kind. We're more than crime and rotting mills, we're strong in soul and mind. One picture and 1,000 words can't show the heart and pride. Proud to call this town our home, so proud we'll never say goodbye. Never say goodbye. This is our town, where my grandfather was born. This is our town, where we no longer mourn. This is our town, we're not wounded anymore. Still strong as steel. This is our town, where my grandfather was born. This is our
it's a real Rocky story, but it's real. It's real. You know, it's like real.